Hey guys, Kale here. So, I'm hoping that this year, 2023, that I will become a Hungarian citizen. Now, before we get into that and what that means and why I'm trying to do this, let me just say, first of all, that there was no podcast last week, and that's just because the New Year's, the holidays, and my brother and I were in Kansas City, and we were at a missions conference that week, and so I was just super busy, wasn't able to put out a podcast episode, and thought, that's okay, first Wednesday of the year, no big deal. I will say that this month, my family and I are gearing back up to go back to Hungary. And so we've got a lot to do this week and next week. And so I probably won't have another episode next week. Not that big of a deal, I know. But just so you know, in January, it's going to be a little spotty. I know that there's some of you who look for it every Wednesday, so that's cool. Thank you guys for listening every week. But I plan, once we're back in Hungary and it got our feet underneath us, in February for sure, then I'll start doing these every Wednesday with a way better video if you're watching on YouTube. Or if you're just listening on Spotify and all of that, hopefully the audio will be better too, because right now I'm just using my laptop and my little mobile setup with microphone and webcam. But back at our home in Budapest, I'll have all of my equipment there. So hopefully this will look and sound better then. But thank you guys for those of you who listen. I'm excited to do this once a week. This is a cool little kind of like a video journal for me to talk about ministry and missions and just kind of whatever's on my heart or whatever I'm thinking about that particular week. And so I really enjoyed doing this. And for the few of you who listen, thank you. I appreciate it. I hope it encourages somebody out there. Also want to mention that in December I released a couple new songs, some music. If you didn't know that I like to sing and write and record music, you can check that out on my YouTube channel, which is also the place a place you can watch this podcast, Kale Horvath Media. I've got two new songs, one called Prodigal Son and another one called Transform Me. And you can find those on YouTube, or you can find them on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, wherever you listen to your music, you can check it out. So that would be cool if you're interested in that. Now, back to what I was talking about. Citizenship in Hungary. What's that mean? Well, let me back up a little bit. When I first found out about Hungary as a potential place to go as missionaries, it was all the way back in 2013. It was 10 years ago. I met a man named Pastor Brett Bartlett, who's a pastor in the Toledo area. And he and his church had been doing for a couple of years at that point some evangelistic youth camps in Hungary. And my pastor, Jeff Bartel, met him and introduced him to me, mostly because Jeff knew that my family, at least my relatives, were Hungarian. My last name is Horvath, and in Hungarian, it's a very common last name. It's pronounced Horvat. And it actually, weirdly enough, I found this out several years ago, that it actually means Croatian. That's what it means in Hungarian. So the word for Croatia, the country, in Hungarian is Horvat Ország, which literally means like Horvath country or Croatian country. So interesting little tidbit, but that's really the main reason why I was first even introduced into the possibility of going to Hungary, was because Jeff knew that my dad's side of the family was Hungarian. And even though I'm like the fourth generation who was born in America, I'm actually half Hungarian. My dad is 100% Hungarian, even though he didn't grow up speaking the language or anything really, other than eating some Hungarian dishes at the holidays. So that was something that I never knew. It was just kind of a fun fact in our family that I didn't know much about. And so when I met Pastor Brett, he invited us, my wife and I, to go on a trip with him, and that was a blast. We had so much fun. And I owe a lot to him and his church for us even being in the country at all today. And that all just kind of started this slow journey of not just missions. I have a different story about God calling us to missions, that maybe that'll be a different episode someday. But that was a journey towards God slowly calling and confirming that me and my family needed to go to Hungary to plant churches. And so this whole my family having history and heritage with Hungary has been just an interesting tidbit that kind of was the initial interest in visiting, and then in going, and even I think being called and God confirming that we should go there in order to fulfill that sounds so lofty, in order to just obey the Great Commission that God has given each and every one of us. And in doing so, we've dug more and more into my family's roots, because it's actually been a really cool thing. It was actually, so I think one of the ways that we were able even to arrive in Hungary in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic, when almost nobody was really coming or going, especially foreigners. And so that's been a really cool thing ever since. I found out years ago, 2018 or 2019, that Hungary has a really neat opportunity for those who are Hungarian by descent but not Hungarian citizens, where you can apply for what they called simplified naturalization as a citizen if you can, really two main things. A, prove your lineage, whether it was your parents, your grandpa, your great grandma, your great great grandma, whoever it was who was born in Hungary, be able to prove that with the proper documents, birth certificates, marriage certificates. And then secondly, in order to apply for the simplified naturalization, which is basically skipping over all of the normal way that somebody would try to become a citizen and immigrate that way. You have to prove your lineage, and then you have to be able to speak the language at a B1 or 2 level. So basically an intermediate level you have to be able to speak. And in some languages, that's not too hard. In Hungarian, that takes a little while to be able to accomplish. And so for me, it was always my goal that I would try to become a Hungarian citizen so that we could stay in the country easier. And every missionary who goes to the field has to figure out how are they going to get to their country and how are they going to stay in their country. Some countries, it's not that difficult to get visas, and some even have missionary visas. In Hungary, it's actually not incredibly difficult to get there and stay, but I mean, anytime you're working with the government, it's a lot of work. And a significant part of a missionary's job is getting to the field and staying there, and I mean significant. And so some guys who go to fields where they're not open to missionaries, they have to use work, or they have to get a work visa or a student visa, or teach English or whatever. I'm sure you've heard those stories from missionaries who are in closed countries. And so this was always something for me. I was like, oh yeah, you know what? In the long run, if I could do this, that would be really cool. But then when we were on deputation, which means fundraising, as we were raising our money to go to Hungary, the pandemic hit in 2020, and we saw international travel halt. And that was a wild thing. And a lot of us and a lot of pastors that I know were starting to consider not only that, man, the end times really are here. We are looking at Lord coming back maybe sooner than a lot of us really expected. And I still haven't, that urgency hasn't left me today. But I remember in 2020, that kind of starting to change my perspective on, listen, if God's called us to this mission field, and I certainly believe he has, and I believe that God opens and he closes doors as he sees fit. But if I'm going to do everything I can to obey what God has called me to do, then I need to prioritize this citizenship opportunity, so that if more of these end timesy things happen, where the devil isn't going to let us travel around the globe as easily as we have in the past, then I need to position me and my family so that we can stay in Hungary regardless of what may happen in the future. We've already seen that if the powers that be decide that there's no more air travel from country to country, then they can just basically push a button and say, so be it. And so if I can become a citizen, and by extension my children, who are also part Hungarian by descent, then that would mean that we can stay in the country much easier, and even my wife would be able to apply for her residence permits much easier because she's married to a Hungarian citizen. And so that became a higher priority for me after 2020. And so this has really been a 2+ year project that I've been working on. It's not an easy thing, of course. If you're someone, or someone who has become an American citizen or a citizen of another country, it takes years, and it's not easy. And so I started working on this thing. Now you might be asking, like, oh, can you be a citizen of both countries? Yeah. So as an American, I can be a dual citizenship. As of right now, I can be a dual citizen of both the U.S. and Hungary. Basically, you hold 2 passports and you're a dual citizen. Some countries you can't. Like, even America has lists of countries that you can't be a dual citizen with. You would have to renounce citizenship to become an American citizen. I would never do that, and unless the Lord makes it painfully obvious to you, I wouldn't suggest you renounce your American citizenship. But as the case may be, where we're at, we can hold both citizenships. And so that is what I started working on over 2 years ago. And so we got all the stuff together early last year, and I got to a early intermediate level in the language, and then I took a few courses with teachers who taught me language and vocabulary that are specifically related to this governmental process. Even if you're an intermediate or a beginner in a certain language, or even pretty good in a language, you aren't going to necessarily know some very specific terminology that's used in law and in citizenship procedures. So I learned some of those, and in the spring of this past year, 2022, I applied. I had all the documents. We found I have many ancestors who were born in Hungary, so we just kind of picked the cleanest line. My great-great-grandma, who was born in Hungary in the late 19th century and immigrated to the U.S., and then basically had to provide all the documentation that proved that I was related to her. And my family, and my dad's side of the family, my dad's aunt and uncle, Jim and Shirley, were monumental and instrumental in me figuring out those names, and they did so much work and help. And it's so cool to see how our family has come together to kind of help me be able to apply for this. And so I applied in the spring, and it could take 6 to 12 months to even hear back. And so when we came back in September to America to have our son, I didn't expect to hear back from him until we were back in Hungary in February of 2023. But I got an email in October of last year from someone in the government, basically asking me to book an appointment with them to discuss my application. And I just told them politely, hey, we're back in America for a short stay because we had a new baby. We'll be back in January, February of next year. Is it okay to wait till then? And oh, by the way, is it good news? Because I don't know what they can or are willing to share. And long story short, they said, yeah, no problem. Contact us when you're back in Hungary. And, in parentheses, it just said it's good news. So that's cool. So I am hoping and praying that that God will grant us the grace and the favor to be able to become Hungarian citizens. Now, my wife won't be. If this all goes well and goes according to plan, then I will become a dual citizen, and Judah will be, because he was born at the time when I applied, and I applied for him as well. But the long-term goal would be for me and our kids, me, Judah, and Isaac, to become citizens. And that would just make it so much easier. I'm super excited. This isn't just a project that, some Americans might be like, oh, I just want to connect to my home country where my ancestors were born, and so this is kind of like a hobby to try and get this. This has been a very intentional thing for me and a strategic thing in order to obey what I feel like the Lord has called my family to. And I'm hoping this will position us to be able to stay in the country and to move about more freely in Europe and the world if I can have this passport, basically what amounts to an EU passport, with Hungary being an EU country, and an American citizen as well. And so I'm really excited for that. So if you guys want to pray for me, I'm going to wait a week or two after we get back from Hungary to just knock the rust off of my language and my brain, brush up on a few, fun law vocabulary words before booking that meeting. But I'm hoping in early February to have that meeting and find out. And then, if everything goes according to plan and the Lord gives us favor, I'm hoping that sometime next year I'll be taking an oath and becoming a Hungarian citizen, a dual citizen of both Hungary and America. And so I just thought I would share that because I don't know how many of you actually know that full story. I've mentioned it in passing and in some newsletters, but I haven't went into full detail too much because I always knew that don't count your chickens till they're hatched. You never know if this will work or not. And so far it seems like it's going well. And so just pray for us that would be something that God would allow us to accomplish this year. It's several years in the making. And I believe it's key to us being able to do what God's asked us to do in Hungary. Pray for your missionaries, guys. Every single missionary spends an inordinate amount of time getting to their field and staying in their field, and all the paperwork and standing in line in immigration offices and the stress of just never knowing, depending on the country you're in, whether they will just randomly decide to not approve an extension on your residence permit is just, it's stressful, and it's a lot of work, and it's something that must be done. And this is just a way that I feel like God has given us to be able to stay in the country easier long term. And so I'm excited for that. Thank you guys for listening. If you listen each week, I really appreciate it. Like I said, in January, probably no podcast next week or necessarily every week this month. But once we get back in February, I'll be putting one out on each Wednesday, just about different things, missions and ministry unfiltered. So thank you guys so much for listening. See you next time. God bless.